My name's Jason Kelley. I'm with the University of Arkansas. I'm the corn extension specialist. I also work in wheat, grain sorghum, but most of my focus is in corn. And other partner today is Joey Branch. He's a consultant, crop consultant in Northeast Arkansas. So I hope both the new presentations for us, and so hopefully we can stay on time. I've told Joey it gets to about 20 minutes or so to start flagging me down, or this 46 minutes will go pretty quickly. So I'll go ahead and get started. Everybody see okay? I know I've dimmed the lights a little bit, and some of the slides I think will turn out all right. But my topic today is corn replant decision. So how many of you guys had to replant corn this year? What happened? Flood? Flood, yeah. So I guess some of those decisions are easy, but there's some of them that are probably a little more difficult. So, this field here is a picture I took this year. What would we do on that field right there? If we just had to do a quick yes or no, would you replant that? Yes, no? No, yes? I forget what the actual plant population is, but if I had to look at the actual number, I would probably say yes, because it's thinner than what it looks. Now, if I told you this picture was taken May 29th, yeah, it changes things, doesn't it? So, those are some of the things I want to talk about today. And, rain...
Was it? May 29th?
Yes, I took this picture May 29th.
It wasn't a what if, okay.
Yeah, no, it was not a what if. I took this picture May 29th, and actually this was already the replant. So, but rainfall, that's probably one of the reasons we get so many questions about replant. And I don't know how well the outline of Arkansas shows up there. This is the rainfall totals March 15th to April 15th this year. So what do we typically do in March 15th to April 15th? Everything, right? Everything. I mean, ideally we'd like to have corn planted in that window. North to south may be some differences, but you think back a year ago, about every field in Arkansas was tracked up, rutted up, so we still had a lot of work to do. But we get these type of rainfalls, causes a lot of problems. Some was planted in this time frame, had some issues, and that's what we're going to talk about. Of course, we had a lot planted a lot later, but 15 inches of rain, 10, 15 inches of rain, that time frame causes a lot of problems. So, rainfall was the biggest thing, but there was a dry window in there this past year, March 25th to April 3rd, when we got a little window to plant some corn. You guys over there, you're over by Wheatley, Morrow, right? You guys get some planted that time frame?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that's when the bulk of ours went in.
Yeah, and I think there was a dry window in there where it had been wet, and it dried off for a little bit. A lot of people planted corn during that time frame, and unfortunately that week or 10 days in there was really not ideal. So if you went back and look, I think I planted some then as well, and we'll look at that. But to me, the fields look dry. You get out there digging around, and a lot of them weren't. Some of them were, some of them weren't. Cold soils, even though it was the 1st of April roughly, I still had soil temperatures of 50 degrees, kind of marginal. And then probably the worst case after that, we got a lot of rainfall. So not maybe ideal to begin with. Cold soils, get a rain after that, and those are three things that to me causes a lot of problems. And so you think about germination, that whole process is really pretty sensitive. It needs oxygen. So we had a lot of fields that get all that rain, seals over. I really think the lack of oxygen was part of the issue. And I've got some slides here showing some of that. So had some seed rot, very delayed emergence, very erratic emergence. And so if you look at the weather conditions, this is at Mariana, across the river and south just a little ways from where we're at today. Planting dates here are high temperature, low temperature, heat units, and then rainfall. So I've got this April 3rd highlighted because I planted some that day. Tell you not to plant ahead of a big rain, plant under good conditions. What I do, I planted then. So I distinctly remember the weatherman saying, well, we might get an inch and a half of rainfall. So I planted, well, 8 out of the next 11 days it rained. And if you add up those rainfall totals, it comes up to about almost 10 inches. You know, the big kicker, 4.5 inches there, but really cold conditions, very little heat units accumulated, get a big rain, you know, not ideal for sure. And so some of the things we saw this past year, a lot of difference timing-wise on how your corn came up. And so this is some pictures. Hopefully it shows up fairly well. But this was taken outside of Little Rock. I took these pictures April 15th. And these slides are on the same producer, same planter, same hybrid, same type of soil. This is pretty sandy soil. This field planted March 19th. He called me and told me he was going to plant March 19th. I would have said, well, it's on the early side, especially if it's 50 degrees. You know, he planted perfect stands. You know, right? That's what happens. You know, a date that I probably would have waited, been a little more comfortable with, March 27th. Only 8 days later, planted. And this is what his field looked like 19 days after planting. He didn't have much there. So if you look at that field 19 days after planting, so there are some plants out there that doesn't show up real well, but how many of you guys had some of that? You know, just didn't come up very good. And so if you dig around, you know, this side here come out of that field, and you had some plants that come up and some that, you know, first instinct, that seed's not any good. Well, you take the seed back and it's fine. So a lot of this, why this plant merged and 6 inches over, you know, these are directly in line, and one just went down the road. One come up, one didn't, two didn't, one was a little behind. You know, I really think that, you know, whether there was a piece of residue there, had a little more oxygen, these rotted. I had a lot of calls that this other side over here out of some of my plots. This one come up fine, next seed down, there's a little sprout. You know, you got a little chilling injury here probably. So a lot of variability. I blame it on lack of oxygen, temperature, sealed over, a lot of things went wrong there. So how do you make decisions on how to replant? You know, some of these fields were easy calls, weren't they? Didn't have much. That previous one didn't have much out there. That was a no-brainer. But what about these fields where we got a decent stand, you drive by, kind of like that first slide I had, first thing, well, it looks okay, you get out there, maybe it's not. You know, to me, plant population, that's really the first thing that I'm looking at. And, you know, I ask guys, are you willing to accept a yield loss? First question is, or first answer is no. You know, right out of the gate, I don't want to have a yield loss. But, and we'll work through some examples here. Late planting, you know, how quickly can I get in there and replant? And planting date makes a lot of difference. We look at that. You know, what extra expenses are you going to have? Because in the end, we want to, you know, what's going to give us the most money, greatest return. And so, planting date, to me, is very critical across all commodities. If you heard something about yield, you'd probably hear the common sentiment, plant early, right? Cotton, rice, soybeans, corn, you know, there's lots of advantages to planting early. I think those are pretty well known. Downside, to me, planting early is important, but if the conditions aren't right, you know, the upside for planting early quickly comes into a problem. So probably more downside, more suboptimum stands, variability, low end of the field, upper end, that sort of thing. So, you know, we've done a lot of planting date studies. This is a study over in Mariana, like I say, across the river and south. 7-year study. We've got planting dates down here on the bottom, and relative yield. You know, these plots, we had 200 bushel corn some years. We'd have 220. We do have 180. So a lot of yield levels. But if you group them by March, April, May, you know, there's a pretty wide window in there, 4 to 6 weeks most years, that you can probably maximize our yield. I mean, I'd like to be early if I can, but if the conditions aren't right, I'm not concerned about planting a week or two later until conditions improve. So, you know, we want to plant early, and there's definitely a yield penalty once we get late. And this late planting, you know, when we replant corn, which is typically a little late in it. So that comes into play, and we'll look at that.
So there's no, in the trial work, at least in that geography, there's no yield penalty at all for planting any time in it. Doesn't look like it.
in April.
Yeah.
You
All the way to
know,
the end of April.
You know,
there's
north
no-
to south, there's gonna be variability, but that location, 20th of March till 1st of May, roughly. You know, there's some variability year to year probably, but to me, yeah, that's what the data shows. Full insurance for that area cuts off April 25th. So, you know, insurance lines up pretty well with our data. All right, so plant population, that to me, that's really important. And so we know corn is very responsive to plant populations, and I might add, all the work that we've done is on irrigated corn. You know, we're about 95% irrigated in Arkansas. You know, other states may have a lot of dry land, but you know, plant population, this is a trial from 2007. You know, our county agent sent me this at the end of the year, and he had a corn hybrid demo, and he said the yields range from 100 to 200. And I'm like, well, you might as well just throw that away. That doesn't mean anything. I said, you got plant populations, and so this is some corn that survived the freeze, skippy stands, and if you put the plant population on there, you can quickly see plant population is very important, right? You don't have the stand, you got 20,000, you make corn, but you're going to make more if you got more plants out there. And so this year, I planted April 3rd, you know, on that previous slide showing that was how terrible time to plant. Well, I had a plant population trial, so I intended to have a wide range in plant populations. Maybe not quite as wide as what I ended up with, but I've got yield over here on the left, our final plant population. So you see a lot of dots out there, and each dot is basically a plot. Had 5 hybrids, Pioneer, Decab, Armor, another Decab, and Agrigold. So some hybrids that you guys are probably planting or out there on the market at least. So you see, what do you notice? Pretty good curve there. A lot of these yields down here, 20,000, when we know is not going to make it. So in this study, our normal 34,000 seeding rate, given the poor conditions, we only ended up with about 25,000 plants. So would you replant that? You know, it depends, right? Depends. So we kept this trial, and on averaged across those 5 hybrids, you know, about 206 bushel. Pretty good. I'm not saying you're going to make 206 bushel at 24,000, but you know, that curve, whatever your yield potential is, could probably move up and down. All right, so if we ended up with an optimum, say 34,000, you follow that curve there, maybe 237. So this is what we ended up with given the poor conditions, and in theory, this is what we would have ended up with. So could you replant for 31 bushel? $120? Maybe, maybe not, depending on what the seed does. You know, seed cost is, if you had to buy it all over, that would be $120, so that would have been, but you know, there's other expenses in there as well. So, and that's what we've always shown, is there's always, you know, how far you are down on this curve dictates what kind of, whether you're going to replant. And in most instances, people call me up, I'm at 25,000. To me, I might leave it, I might tear it up. Yeah.
So I'm assuming there's not a bunch of skips, like foot.
Well, there was skips. This is variable. This come up non-uniform. So this is not a perfect stand. So that's really why I'm showing. I've got other data, the perfect stands. You know, is that relevant for this? I don't know. But this is really struggled. You know, most of them, you've got some skips. You've got some probably 1 leaf differences in stage. You know, I don't have 3 gross leaf differences, but there's some differences there. Okay, so this is the first planting. You can kind of see what we got. All right, what if we made the decision to replant that? And so what we did, we scooted over, did the exact same thing. We just scooted over and planted the same hybrids. And so we replanted this April 29th. To me, you know, I told you earlier, Keith, that May 1st was kind of the cutoff. So we're kind of at the edge yield-wise when yields are going to start declining from late planting. So this is the replant, same set of hybrids, yields, population. So our normal 34,000 seeding rate gave us about 221 bushel.
15 bushels better than the original planting.
15 bushels,
Those same
exactly.
hybrids.
Exactly. So to me, and I've got some numbers here, so just because you had a poor stand, your perception is I'm going to really do a whole lot better. 15 bushels sounds like a lot, right? Well, so if you go through the numbers here, two scenarios. We kept on the left-hand side, we keep our original planning, 100% yield potential based on that April date, roughly 90% based on where we were on plant population. Sorry, Keith, no fungicide.
Story of my life.
Yeah.
Don't worry about it.
Planted early, 206. Okay? All right, so different scenario. We had this. We tore it up, replanted April 29th. To me, we're still pretty close to 100% yield potential. I think it's probably starting to drop off. Assuming seed company is going to give you 3/4 of that seed back, destroy the old stand, 2-3 ways of doing that. We tilled it up and started over. Later planting, maybe we need a fungicide. Add another irrigation, pushes harvest back. You know, you could argue these numbers, but on this situation, $67 more per acre in replanting. So 221 on the replant, 221 minus 206, 15 bushel extra. You penciled in at $4 corn, break even pretty much.
How do you feel about your pre-plant nitrogen that you put in there? Because you went in now and you've tilled it up, you've redone those beds.
We didn't put any more nitrogen.
So you just, and everything else was the same?
We assumed everything else was the same side dress, same irrigation, you know.
But that could potentially be another
Yeah.
input if.
Yeah. So you could argue that, you know, maybe we made money, maybe we lost money, but, you know, pretty close to break even to me. All right, so next scenario, say we same scenario, we just changed the date a little bit. Instead of April 29th, maybe it was May 10th. And there's a lot of corn planted May 10th this year. So then all of a sudden, instead of 100% yield potential, maybe we're down to 90%. So we've lost several bushel there, keep the same extra inputs. And based on our planting dates, I didn't have a May 10th planting this year, but you know, I'm extrapolating data, maybe 199. That may be optimistic. All of a sudden, we're going the wrong way. So that's kind of working through some scenarios. I like to say that there's some things that are some night and day, very clear to look at. Some are really, you have to put some thought into it. But to me, criteria for questionable fields, plant populations, we know 25,000 is not going to maximize yields. But is that enough? You know, how's that figure into your plans? Second, you know, what's your optimum planting window? Can you get it replanted if you're 2-3 weeks late past that when yields start to decline? I'm a lot more inclined to keep something a little marginal. I hear a lot about consistency. You mentioned that. You know, I think that's real. Personally, I think these first two are more important. What we showed there at Istro, you know, the guys at the station there in Mariana, they're famously optimistic. I call up, did I get a stand? Oh yeah. This year, I called up, no, you didn't get a stand. So, you know, to me, it looked ugly, but in the end, everything else was right. You know, we did everything right. Small plots, that may not always be the case. You know, we got to consider these extra expenses. So, you know, what did we learn from this year? What can I do to improve emergence? Well, you know, nothing new to me. I like to plant early, but I'm going to wait for optimum conditions. You know, get a warming trend, have some warm soil, you know, no big rains after that. I think that's, you know, everybody kind of knows that sometimes what the weather person says versus what happens is not always the same. I noticed this year, tall beds, I guess most of us, are we planting corn on beds? You know, 38-inch rows versus 30. You know, those 38-inch rows are probably have a larger bed, and I think in some instances that probably improved drainage this year. Anyway, we can get better drainage, that's a positive. Stale seed bed, to me, I've had trials in the past where we had a split field for one reason or another. Half of it was bedded up a month prior to planting, the other half bedded up the day before planting, and that stale seed bed, you get a rain on it, always seems to do a little better. Is it more uniform temperature? Maybe it sheds water better, dries out better, something's different. Cover crops, to me, I'm not always a big proponent of cover crops, but I think this year we had some residue on there, on that soil surface that may have aided emergence. Planter setup, I saw some, we had way too much down pressure on those closing wheels. Especially if it's wet ground, you're really packing that down, you get a rain on it, I think that can be an issue. I like to plant 2 inches deep. I think, Joey, you're going to talk about planting depth. 3 inches, I think, is too deep, especially if we're planting early in the window. Poor conditions. We had some planted, I think, too deep and end up with some problems. So, went through that fairly quickly, I know, and might mention all this information that I presented. The data there has been come out of projects that were funded by our Corn and Grain Sorghum Promotion Board in Arkansas. So kudos to them.
If you had, there is no answer necessarily on this. It's just, you gotta go by your gut in some ways.
Yeah.
If you have about 25,000, fairly uniform, and you're in April, my tendency would be to fertilize it right, do whatever you need to take care of it, and move on.
There's no guarantee, you have a perception you're losing yield. You replant, we had a lot of instances, they tear up something that might have been feasible, they replant, and then they end up with something not as good as what they had the first time. So, yeah. And, there's differences in hybrids. This short time, I didn't talk about that, but there's some hybrids that are probably going to do better at a lower population than some of the others. So, that's even something else we look at.
Is the 75% replant pretty common with corn seed companies?
Most of them, yeah. What do you guys replant? Decab,
That's
get
just kind of the standard in the
75%?
trade.
Yes, sir, yeah, we're usually decab and armor,
Yeah.
mainly, that's kind of what they do.
Oh, 75%, okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Pretty common.
Yeah. But if you had to fork over $125 in seed, you would never replant, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. All right, well, yeah, this is, we talk about all this corn that this is early planted out here, planted March 15th or so. Beautiful. So we talk about early planting, and sometimes everything lines up right, so. Yeah.
I'm east of you, less irrigation, and I know it'd be a guesstimate from your standpoint, but if I did have the ability to do that, later planting, later seed corn, what would your guesstimate be on population that you feel comfortable staying with? And I know that's gonna be a guesstimate.
We've done some, what I would call dry land or very limited. It depends on what your yield potential is. If it turns off really dry, probably 20,000 is enough. We've had some studies where we were at, we had 20,000, that was our best, highest yielding plot. If we had more, when we didn't have the water, yields went down. So, and other years, if it rains, I assume this year probably a pretty good yield with rainfall. Most of we have a limited amount of dry land, but 28,000 is kind of where we typically shoot for. In good years, we probably don't have enough plants. In dry years, we may have too many. All right.